Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. All right, today on the show, I am talking with Casandra Austin-McDonald. She is a personal growth strategist, a speaker and author, and the founder of the Live Greater Institute. Casandra helps women to have healthier relationships with themselves so they have healthier relationships with others by breaking up old patterns and beliefs. Casandra is also a mental health advocate, the host of the Grow Through It podcast, and has been featured on several other podcasts, blogs, and various media outlets. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you here. This is such an important topic. Healthier relationships begin with self, because you know, the old saying goes, if you don't love yourself, how can you love others?
Yes.
And
yes.
I used to think that it was bullshit, basically. I really did. But it's true. I mean, you're not saying that you can't love other people, but it really does change how you perceive the world when you actually love yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You stop taking other people's stuff as your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned is what is going on with other people 9 times out of 10 has absolutely nothing to do with me. It's them acting out their own traumas. And that helped me to see that, oh, it's not about me. It's about, that's their stuff.
Right. Right. So, you know, those of us who are survivors, one of the biggest things, especially sexual assault, domestic abuse, childhood trauma, all of that, you know, we've had it browbeat into us so hard that we're worthless.
Yes.
And that we deserve what we got. We earned what we got. And so we begin to believe that.
Yeah.
And where do we start with changing that? I mean, it took me years to figure it out.
I think for me, it's funny that you say this. I just sent out an email this morning to my community. I was reflecting on my journey. You know, I've been reflecting a lot this year. If 2020 hasn't done anything else for us,
right?
You got time to reflect, right?
Absolutely.
And I really think it was the awareness that helped me to start my journey. It was the awareness of there's got to be more to life than this. And what they did, I don't think that had something to do with me. Now, even though I hadn't worked that out yet, somewhere deep inside, I think I knew that. And I think that's really what started that journey for me is I had this awareness of there is an answer, or there is a solution, or healing, you know, is possible for me. And really what I think started that for me is my son's father and I split up when he was a baby. And I remember how devastated I was because I felt betrayed, and he had moved on so quickly, and I was a single mom. And I remember at that time, I was thinking that there was something wrong with me. And a few years later, I found myself once again in a really bad relationship. And I was like, okay, there's a pattern here. But this time it wasn't with a man, it was with a woman. And I was like, okay, I switched genders thinking I could avoid the problem. But the common denominator is me. And so I realized that I was acting out childhood traumas. I was basically getting into these dysfunctional relationships because of my programming and conditioning that dysfunction was normal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I became aware that that's what was happening, where I was like, okay, this is very familiar. This reminds me of my childhood. And that's when I kind of was like, do I have to keep living like this? So I think it was that awareness.
So, when we hit that level of awareness, and I think I agree with you. I think we all at some point finally hit that awareness that, okay, it's not me. It was my past that is still rearing its ugly head.
Yeah.
Then what do we do?
I think that's when we have to separate ourselves from the hurt and the wounds and kind of have like this objective point of view. And it's interesting because literally just today, I mean, I'm not, just because I'm on this path doesn't mean I'm not, I still get panic attacks. I still get anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
And just today, your listeners probably can't see this, but I had to pull up a picture of my younger self because I knew that she was afraid of something. I made a big decision and fear was coming up. Anxiety was coming up. And so for me, what I've learned to do is kind of reparent and remother myself and to realize, okay, the little girl within is afraid, or the little girl within, it's like she's reacting to something. And for me to kind of step back and see what is going on. And I think it takes practice to cultivate that, because when you're feeling such strong emotions, you want to react, that's just kind of how we're designed. But I think over time, when you raise that awareness and you start practicing pausing for the cause, as I call it, eventually you could start to separate the hurt from the person and look back and say, like, okay, what exactly is going on here? Why am I feeling this way? And start to question it.
I that's a lot to take in. And I love that you have a picture of your younger self, because that is the one that got hurt.
Yes.
And for many of us with childhood trauma, it's our younger self that got hurt, and we're still trying to protect her. Mm-hmm. We've got to reassure her that she's safe.
Yes.
And that nobody can hurt her anymore.
Absolutely.
What does self-love look like to you?
Not judging myself, not allowing the inner critic to beat me up, not taking other people's actions personally, realizing that other people projecting their hurt, their shame, their guilt onto me has nothing to do with me. It's actually more of a reflection of them and where they're at on their journey. Mm-hmm. And to give myself what I need when I need it. If I need rest, I rest. If I need to go for a walk in nature, go for a walk in nature. If I need to schedule an appointment with my therapist, do that. Just being more in tune with self and giving myself what I need, meeting my own needs.
That's perfect. I love that description. And the reason I ask is because for so long, I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of self-love. What does this concept look like? Mm-hmm. And it took me until just a couple of years ago, really, to figure it out for myself. Very similar to yours. For me, it's, a lot of self-care. Mm-hmm. Like you said, listening to what my body needs, setting up my boundaries and not allowing others to cross those.
Yes, that is so important.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially with my kids. They like to cross those boundaries. Yeah. So I wanted to give the listeners some kind of idea of what this concept of self-love actually looks like, because until you actually grasp it, for me anyway, it was impossible to visualize.
Yeah.
And to imagine.
Yeah. And you hear so many people talking about love yourself, but they don't talk about the practicality of it. Like, what does that look like? And what I always tell my clients and my students is it doesn't look the same for everybody. There's no cookie cutter way to learn how to rediscover your self-worth and to love yourself. It's really learning what does self need, and not self needing from a coping space, right? Like, a lot of us learn negative coping patterns from the trauma. So we have to unlearn that, and we have to learn healthier ways to cope. And it's figuring out, what do I need that's actually good for me? And that's going to support me in my recovery. And that's going to support me in wellness and health and things like that.
Yeah. No, you talked about the negative thoughts, and this comes up quite often on my calls with people, because we all have those negative thoughts, that voice, that just loves to, that voice. Anyway, how do you shut down that voice? What do you do when that voice pops up?
I have to acknowledge it. You know, I spent so many years suppressing, and I have this saying that I often say, that lack of expression due to suppression leads to depression. And so what I learned was that if I suppress what's going on inside and try to stuff it down and pretend like it doesn't exist, I end up depressed and very deep, dark depression, you know, the suicidal ideations and all. And over the years, I started to basically be a student of myself and figure out, why the heck am I constantly going through depression? Because externally, you know, I had a career. My son was a great kid. I mean, it looked like things were fine, but I was always at war with them myself. And what I had to discover was that I was always trying to ignore that inner critic, thinking, if I just ignore it, I'm just going to ignore it. Maybe you'll shut up. But that doesn't work. What I realize is you have to, it's like calling a spade a spade. You have to call it out and say, okay, I hear you. And then speak back with truth, you know? One thing that I really struggled with when I was early on in starting my own life coaching practice and my business was I didn't feel smart enough, because those were statements I heard growing up. You're stupid. You're never going to be nothing, blah, 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 blah. So when those tapes were playing over and over and over again, I had to feel that, you know, that shame that I felt. But in that moment, I also had to affirm for self, you know, reparenting and mothering myself, that no, the truth is, you are good enough. You are capable of doing this. You are smart enough. And so really just acknowledging it and then affirming with the truth about yourself, because those are lies. Those are programming and conditioning we got passed down to us from somebody who did not love themselves. And so we have to love ourselves with the truth.
I like that. And I've found, actually, the more I do that with the voices, or with the inner critic, voices in my head. No, I'm not schizophrenic. I don't think. But no, the more I do that, the softer they are. And what I mean by softer is, you know, for example, I went into the kitchen today and got a piece of banana bread. And, you know, the inner critic popped up and said, wait, you know, you're trying to lose weight. You shouldn't be eating that. And it used to be that inner critic would pop up and say, you know, something more like, yo, fatso, put it down, or, you know, something like that. So I'm finding that it's popping up and it's still there, but it's coming up a lot softer and a lot gentler. The more I work on getting rid of the negativity, because it still wants to be heard. So it's finding a new way to be heard. And that's with a softer, gentler, you know, we have a path that we're trying to stick on or stick to, you know, are you sure that's a wise idea? And I can say, look, I'm giving myself permission to eat this. Yeah. And it will say, okay. And be gone with that. And there's no guilt. Took me a long time to get there, though.
Yeah, it really does, especially when you've spent most of your life living with the inner critic. And you really have to cultivate, I call it our inner cheerleader. You know, you have to like build it up to the point where that voice almost becomes louder and overrides the inner critic. And then, like you said, it's almost like an integration happens where the inner critic may be present, but it's not as like violent and as like in your face. It's kind of like this little more off to the side thing. And it's like, okay, I hear you.
Yeah, I hear you. I got you. Thank you. I'm going to do this. Yeah, absolutely. It's our little Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah, I always call it the monkey brain. Like I envision like the monkeys jumping all over the place. And I'm just like, all right, here we go. Get off the damn monkey bars.
I can see that. You know. Yeah, our heads are a barrel of monkeys. Mm-hmm. So have you found, as you heal yourself and you learn to love yourself, that your relationships with others have changed?
Oh, absolutely. It's like night and day, you know, and I'll share a little bit about my romantic and my friendships, if that's okay.
Sure.
My romantic relationships were extremely, probably both romantic and friendships were codependent, but in the romantic relationships, it was always me getting cheated on, but then me putting up with it. And there was always some really obvious issue with the partner where I always was holding on to this false hope of they'll change, I can fix them.
Yeah.
It's like the little kid in me all over again, like a project. And it's like, no, people are not projects.
Right.
And I actually had to go on a journey, you know, where I practiced celibacy. And I shared in one of my episodes, I didn't do it for religious reasons. I did it because I realized I was having sex for the wrong reasons. I was either acting out my trauma, or I thought that I was just supposed to give my body away because that's what the person wanted. I had no concept of boundaries. I had no concept of tapping into my own desires and what my body wanted. And so I took a period of time where I went on like this self-love, dating myself, celibacy journey. And eventually I met my husband. We've been together for over 6 years, and this has been the healthiest relationship I've ever had in my life. We communicate very well. I swear God had to make him for me, because he's my polar opposite in certain ways, to where when I may have a trigger or when I may have an episode, it does not emotionally affect him because he's so grounded. He's so sturdy in who he is. He's a confident man. He's not arrogant, but he's just so certain of who he is. And I need that in my life because it's kind of been rubbing off on me and helping me to take on those traits. With my friendships, I was always friends with the mean girl. I was the one being picked on, bullied, betrayed, not treated right. And I was always friends with the mean girl. And I think it was more of a reflection of that childhood dynamic acting out with the dysfunction between me and my sisters. I was the scapegoat and the black sheep of the family. And the golden child in my family was the one who was like the mean girl. And she was the one who was also like the teacher's pet, where my parents just put her on a pedestal, even though she would do madness behind their back. And then I also was bullied and picked on growing up by other girls. And so I somehow started to gravitate those types of women into my life for friends. And I have released a lot of friendships throughout my healing journey. But what I have now attracted into my life are a very small, close-knit group of women who I trust and I can confide in, and they support me. There's no hater crap going on. And that madness.
No high school drama.
Exactly. You know, and I'm thinking like, we're grown women and y'all still doing this. Like, I don't have time for this. But, literally night and day. And for me, part of my healing journey, it was very hard to understand that I would have to release and let go of relationships as I was growing and evolving. So it took some growing pains throughout that time. But I've learned that people are in your life for either a reason, season, or a lifetime. And once you start to learn who's in what position, you're able to release and let go with more ease.
I love that. People are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. That is fantastic. Wow, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing a little bit about your journey. And, you know, I know that it's helped me a little bit more to, you know, visualize the whole self-love and all of that. And I hope it's helped the listeners too.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
This has been great. And listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week on the show.